The chanting began before the first handful of soil struck her skin. It was dusk, the horizon painted in ash and orange as if the sky itself wished to look away. Rough hands held her down, binding wrists and ankles with frayed rope, their breaths quick with fury and fear. Each voice in the crowd rose like a wave, crashing, breaking, reforming. Which, cursed one, bring her to the earth. She tried to speak, her voice cracked and raw, but their shouts drowned her words until they became no more than silence swallowed by noise. The pit was shallow, cruel in its purpose. It was not dug to bury a body with dignity, but to trap a soul, to silence a life still burning. She thrashed once as the first mound of dirt struck her chest. Dust filled her mouth, dry, bitter, ancient. She coughed, choking, but the villagers cheered as though her struggle proved her guilt. Hands shoved more earth upon her, grain by grain, their rhythm cruel and steady. The ropes cut deeper into her skin as she clawed uselessly at the ground, nails splitting, blood seeping into the soil. Above her, faces blurred with anger, shadows cast long by the dying sun. Yet not all eyes were cruel. Behind a thorn bush at the edge of the square, a child crouched low, hands pressed to his mouth to hold back sobs. His eyes were wide, shimmering with the reflection of her struggle. He wanted to run to her, to scream at them to stop, but fear pinned him in place. His tears made small dark circles in the dust where they fell, unnoticed by the mob. The soil grew heavier, pressing on her chest until every breath felt like lifting stone. She gasped, each inhale shorter than the last, panic surging through her veins like fire. Her throat raw, she tried again to scream, but the earth muffled her voice, swallowing it whole. She thrashed, her body arching upward, but the ropes dragged her back down, the weight of the crowd's hatred burying her faster than the soil itself. Darkness crept in, not from the sky, but from the suffocating weight of earth as it closed over her face. Grains slid across her lips, filled her nose, pressed into her eyes. She could no longer see the faces of her accusers, only the shifting red glow of sunset bleeding through the soil. The world grew distant, muffled, as though she were already beneath water. Her chest convulsed, lungs begging for air that would not come. Every instinct screamed to fight, but her limbs weakened, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her skull. Just as her last gasp rattled from her lips, the earth pressed closer, not crushing but moving. A shiver ran through her body. The soil was not still. It pulsed, slow, deliberate, like the steady beat of something alive. It slid against her skin as though it had hands of its own, curling, holding, cradling. Her terror flickered, replaced by something colder, stranger. She stopped thrashing. She listened. Beneath the roaring silence of suffocation, she felt it, the soil breathing with her, against her, through her. The earth drank her fear and returned a deeper rhythm, steady, ancient, infinite. Her vision dimmed, the last traces of sunlight fading into black. The chanting above had ceased. Or perhaps she had sunk too deep to hear it anymore. The child behind the thorn bush watched the last of her hand vanish beneath the dirt, his breath caught in his chest, his body trembling. He wiped his tears but could not move. In that silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through grass, he swore he felt the ground beneath him shift. And then there was nothing. No breath. No sound. Only the stillness of earth wrapping her in its embrace. The earth did not bury her. It claimed her. The girl was known not for riches or finery but for the soil under her fingernails and the warmth in her voice. At dawn, when the horizon bled pale gold and the village was still stretching awake, she would already be in the fields. Her hands brushed over the stalks of millet and maize as if they were fragile children, her lips carrying a tune older than memory. It was not a song anyone had taught her, yet it clung to her tongue as if she had been born humming it. When she sang, the crops lifted their heads as though listening, and even in seasons when rain forgot the land, her small patch of field remained stubbornly green. People called it luck at first, then blessing. But whispers once born never stayed kind. Children loved her. They would chase after her when she walked through the village paths, carrying bundles of leaves or bowls of grain, tugging at her hands so she might sing to their own gardens. She always obliged, kneeling, voice low and sweet, coaxing stubborn seedlings into sprouts. The mothers watched with gratitude, though sometimes a shadow passed across their faces, a flicker of unease. It was not natural, they thought, but who could argue with thriving harvests when hunger stalked their huts? Her mother, frail with sickness, often sat by the doorway of their thatched home, weaving mats with trembling hands. She would smile faintly whenever her daughter returned from the fields, cheeks darkened with sun, a little boy trailing at her side like a shadow. The boy, her younger brother, adored her with the devotion only the innocent know. He followed her everywhere, mimicking her movements, pretending to sow and reap, even carrying a small clay bowl of water to bless the ground as she did. To him, she was not strange or gifted. She was simply the sister who filled his belly and sang him to sleep when their mother's coughs kept her awake. There was one who lingered on the edges of her days, a young man whose heart had long been hers though his lips never dared confess it. He was strong, his arms scarred from labor, his gaze always lowered when she approached. Yet in the market, when she laughed while trading, his eyes would betray him, watching, yearning. He carved little figures of birds and left them on the path near her field, never admitting they were his. She would pick them up with puzzled eyes, wondering who left them, and he would pretend not to know. His silence was not from cowardice alone, it was also fear of how the village looked at her, fear that love tied to her name would be mocked or worse, cursed. Still, she walked each day with a smile that seemed to deny envy its place. But envy is not a thing that disappears simply because kindness meets it. In the larger homes, where men boasted of their herds and women compared their granaries, jealousy festered like rot in a closed jar. Their fields suffered where hers flourished. Their pride cracked each time her harvest yielded double while their own withered. It was easier to believe she cheated the soil than to admit that their greed and neglect brought ruin. So they whispered. First in corners, then in gatherings. Her gift was not a blessing, they said, but a bargain. They spoke of how she sang to the earth at night when no one was watching, how her crops seemed to drink not just water but blood. A goat had gone missing one season, and though it had been found days later tangled in the forest vines, the tale was retold differently. She took it. She feeds the ground. With each retelling, suspicion grew thicker, like weeds choking truth. At home she noticed the glances. Where once neighbors greeted her with baskets of millet, now they pressed their lips tight and hurried away. Where children once danced to her songs, mothers now pulled them back, muttering excuses. Even the air felt different, as if the earth itself sensed the shifting hearts of those around her. She told her mother, but the woman only sighed, her breath shallow from illness. Goodness is easily forgotten, my child. Fear lasts longer. Her brother remained unshaken. He clung to her hand, stubborn in his love, and when others whispered, he shouted louder, "She is no witch. She is my sister." His voice cracked with youth, but his conviction carried weight. She smiled at him then, though sorrow pricked her eyes. For even she, in her bones, felt the tide turning. And still the admirer stayed silent. He watched the distance growing around her, saw how she carried baskets heavier than before because no one offered to share the load. He wanted to speak, to say that he believed in her more than the earth beneath his feet. But his tongue turned to stone each time he tried, and he let his chance drift away on the wind. One evening, as the sun bent low, she returned from the field and caught a fragment of conversation. Two men stood near the council hut, their voices low, words sharp. Her songs are not prayers. They are spells. If she is left, the drought will worsen. We must act before the gods punish us all. They turned and noticed her then, smiling too quickly as if their faces could hide their tongues. But she had heard enough. She knew betrayal was already sown, and soon the harvest would come. She stood by her field that night, the moon painting the crops silver, and sang softly, not to grow, not to heal, but to steady her heart. The soil, loyal and patient, hummed back beneath her feet. Yet no song could drown the truth she felt looming. The same hands that once welcomed her songs would later shovel her grave. The rains did not come that year. Clouds hung over the horizon like silent threats but never broke, never spilled. Day after day the sun burned the soil into cracked plates, the air dry enough to split lips and sting throats. The streams shrank into trickles, the village wells echoed hollow, and even the animals stumbled in search of water. Cattle bones whitened under the sky, and the once green fields turned brittle and gray. Hunger crept through the village huts at night, whispering louder with each passing week. It was in this season of thirst that whispers turned to accusations. Those who had long envied her gift seized their chance. They pointed to her fields where, though touched by the drought, the plants still stood taller than the rest. "Look at her crops," they spat, bitterness coating their words. "Look how they survive while ours die." Others nodded, too weary to question, too afraid of hunger's bite. They twisted memory into poison. They recalled the way she sang to the earth, once a source of awe and gratitude, now rebranded as menace. "We thought her songs were blessings," one woman muttered at the market, her voice carrying just far enough for others to hear. But listen closely, it was never prayer. It was whispers. Dark whispers. The story grew each time it passed through another mouth. By the week's end, her voice was no longer music but sorcery. Her songs were not healing, they said, but commands, binding the soil to her alone. Fear spread like fire through dry grass. In the evenings, villagers gathered outside their huts, clutching empty bowls, muttering about curses. Some swore they had seen her walking the fields at night with eyes glowing red, though none had actually witnessed such a thing. Others claimed her shadow was longer than her body, proof that she was marked. Lies stacked atop lies until the weight of them crushed reason entirely. Her mother, coughing weakly on her mat, tried to soothe her daughter's trembling hands. "Truth outlives lies," she said, though her voice wavered. "The drought will pass and they will see." But her daughter knew better. Fear was a seed once sown that only grew deeper roots. And envy, once watered with hardship, never starved. Her brother grew angrier by the day. He shouted at the market when he heard the whispers, his small fists clenched. "She is no witch. She is my sister." But the people only sneered, pity in their eyes. They patted his head and told him children did not understand the ways of the world. He ran to her, tears streaming, and clung to her waist. She stroked his hair and whispered that she would protect him, though her own chest ached with dread. The council called a gathering. Word spread through the village like thunder, and when the day came, the square filled with men and women, their faces sharp with hunger and suspicion. She stood before them, hands trembling but head unbowed. Her brother clung to her leg, refusing to let go, while her admirer lingered in the crowd, his eyes locked on her though his lips remained sealed. The elder of the council raised his hand, demanding silence. His voice carried heavy with authority, but beneath it trembled fear of the people he led. "We suffer because the earth denies us. Our fields are barren, our children starve. Yet hers grow where ours die. Tell me, how can this be?" Murmurs rose, a tide of voices swelling with agreement. She stepped forward, voice shaking but firm. "I have done nothing but care for the soil. I sing as my mother sang, as her mother sang before her. If my crops grow, it is not by sorcery but by labor and love." Her words fell heavy but found no roots. The villagers were too far gone, their fear deafening. Another man shouted, "She fed the soil with dark whispers. She kept the rain from us." The crowd echoed him, voices overlapping until they became a single beast, roaring. Some spat at the ground in front of her. Others clutched their children close as though her shadow might poison them. Her brother cried out, breaking from her grasp. He ran to the front of the crowd, his face red with desperation. "She taught me to plant seeds," he screamed, tears streaking down his cheeks. "She showed me how to water them, how to care for them. She never hurt anyone. She is good." His small body shook, his voice cracking, but he did not stop. "You are all wrong." For a moment silence fell. The crowd looked at him, their eyes softening briefly at the sight of innocence so raw. But it was gone as quickly as it came, swallowed by the growl of fear. The elder shook his head, pity in his eyes. "The boy is blinded by love. He cannot see truth." The crowd agreed, voices rising again, harsher, louder, until the child's sobs were lost in the storm. She reached for him, pulling him back into her arms, shielding his face against her dress. Her heart broke as she held him, but she forced her own tears down, refusing to give her accusers the sight of her despair. She looked at the crowd, at neighbors who had once shared meals with her, who had once thanked her for her songs, and she saw only strangers with stones for hearts. The verdict was already written in their eyes. Fear had won. Truth was buried before she ever would be. The same boy she taught to plant seeds stood crying, but no one listened. The trial was called at noon, though no judgment was needed. The sun bore down on the village square, turning the air thick and heavy, as though the heavens themselves leaned close to witness what men would do. The heat pressed into her skin, blinding in its glare, and yet the cold in the eyes of her neighbors cut deeper than any sunbeam. They dragged her forward with ropes biting into her wrists, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. Each step raised small clouds of dust that clung to her skin and burned her throat. She tried to stand tall, but her shoulders trembled, her breath caught between sobs and rage. All around, the villagers crowded in, faces twisted with hunger, suspicion, and something darker, a relief in finding a victim to blame. There were no questions, no evidence weighed, no space for her voice. The council stood like shadows at the edge of the square, their silence permission enough for the mob to rule. When she tried to speak, her words broke against jeers. "I am innocent," she cried, but a stone whistled through the air and struck her shoulder. She staggered, gasping. Laughter broke out, cruel and sharp. Another stone came, then another, pelting her until her arms bruised and her knees buckled. She looked to the elders, eyes wide with desperate pleading. None met her gaze. One shifted his feet, another cleared his throat, but none stepped forward. Their silence was more damning than the stones. Her brother cried out from somewhere in the crowd, his small body held back by strong hands. He screamed her name until his voice cracked, but his cries melted into the roar of the crowd. She twisted, trying to see him, but dust and sun blurred her sight. On the ground, with her hands bound and her lips split from a stone, she tried again to speak. Her voice rasped, swallowed by dust. "I have done nothing but give, nothing but care for the earth that feeds you." The words wavered, broken by the heat in her lungs and the taste of blood in her mouth. She coughed, the sound pathetic against the thunder of voices rising around her. The chant began then, low and uneven at first, then gathering rhythm. "Into the soil with her. Into the soil with her." It was no verdict, no solemn decree, it was a song of cruelty fed by fear. Men, women, even those who once broke bread with her, shouted it, voices rough with hunger and desperation. Some spat, others raised fists, all bound together by the need to see her fall so their own misery might feel lighter. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching for one face, one anchor of humanity. And she found him, her silent admirer, standing near the back. His eyes were fixed on her, wide, stricken, as if every stone thrown struck his own flesh. For a heartbeat, hope flared in her chest. He would speak, he would step forward, he would stop this madness. She held his gaze, her breath caught, waiting. But then, slowly he lowered his eyes. His shoulders hunched, his fists clenched at his sides, but he did not move. He turned his face away as though he could not bear to watch, as though blindness might erase his guilt. The hope in her chest cracked, then crumbled. She bowed her head, dust streaking her cheeks where tears traced their way down. The chanting grew louder, the rhythm relentless. Rough hands seized her arms again, dragging her across the square toward the pit waiting at its edge. She stumbled once more, knees tearing against stones, but no one reached to steady her. The dust rose, catching in her throat until her last cries broke into coughing. The sun watched from above, pitiless and unmoving, as judgment was carried out not by law, but by hunger, envy, and fear. She tried one final time to lift her voice above the chant, to claim her innocence, to remind them she was one of them, flesh of their flesh. But her words broke like dry reeds in the wind. And so the chant swallowed her whole. Into the soil with her. And in the crowd, the one who loved her looked away, afraid to act. The pit had been waiting for her, dug hastily in the hard ground beyond the square. It was not deep, only wide enough for her body, shallow enough that the earth could swallow her quickly. The villagers dragged her to its edge, her arms bound so tightly the ropes had carved angry lines into her flesh. Her feet scraped across the dry soil, her breath ragged from the stones and the chanting. She did not resist now, there was nothing left to resist with. Only her eyes moved, darting between the faces above her, faces once familiar, once kind, that now looked down with cold anticipation. They lowered her roughly, shoving her body into the hollow. The soil was cool against her bruised skin, a cruel contrast to the sun that had scorched her hours before. The ropes cut into her ankles as she twisted, trying to ease her body upright, but hands pressed down on her shoulders, forcing her flat. She cried out, not in words but in the sharp gasp of air punched from her lungs. Above, the chanting had softened into a grim rhythm, a drumbeat of cruelty. The first handful of earth struck her stomach with a muted thud. Then another on her chest. She coughed as the dust rose, catching in her throat, burning her eyes. She kicked her bound feet, writhing like a fish caught in a net, but her struggles only earned jeers. The earth came faster now, tossed by many hands, a rain of soil and stone that fell without pause. It crept over her legs first, seeping into the folds of her dress, cold against her skin. Then her arms, pinned by the weight, until her movements grew sluggish. She tried to raise her face to the sky, gasping for air as the pit filled grain by grain. "Please," she managed to cry, but her voice cracked into silence, drowned beneath the scrape of shovels and the hiss of falling dirt. The crowd leaned closer, their eyes burning with the satisfaction of judgment fulfilled. They saw her not as a girl but as a scapegoat, a vessel for their fear. Each grain of soil they threw was an absolution for their own failings. If she was guilty, then they were innocent. If she was buried, then their hunger had meaning. The earth reached her chest. She could barely draw breath now, her ribs straining against the weight. Her heart pounded furiously, a wild drum inside a cage. She could feel her pulse in her temples, hot and desperate. She thought of her brother, his small hands clutching hers, his tears wet against her dress. She thought of her mother, coughing, too weak to rise from her mat. For them she wanted to live, to fight, to break free. But the hands above her did not falter, and the pit did not forgive. Soil pressed against her neck, cold and damp, carrying the smell of earthworms and roots. She turned her head desperately to the side, her cheeks scraping against grit. Tiny creatures writhed against her skin, blind and relentless. Roots tangled around her hair as though the earth itself sought to claim her. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each one sharper than the last. She opened her mouth to scream again, but soil slipped between her lips, clinging to her tongue, choking her words. The villagers kept working, their motions steady, mechanical, as though shoveling grain into a storehouse. She could hear them muttering above her, words of prayer mixed with curses. Their voices blurred together until they were only noise, meaningless and cruel. She tried to cling to one sound, the sob of her brother, the silence of her admirer, but they were swallowed by the roar of the crowd. The last of the sky narrowed above her, a strip of harsh light framed by faces she once trusted. Then even that was gone. Soil slid across her face, into her nostrils, her eyes, sealing her in darkness. She thrashed one final time, her body jerking against the ropes, but her limbs were heavy now, pinned by the weight of the earth. Her chest burned. Her lungs clawed for air that did not exist. Panic surged, hot and wild, but beneath it something else stirred. She felt the worms crawling against her skin, the roots tightening around her wrists, the earth pressing into every crevice of her body. And then she felt her fear shift. Not dissolve, transform. It was not terror that filled her mind in those last moments. It was fury. Rage hotter than the sun that had dried the fields, deeper than the pit they had thrown her in. Rage at the faces that had once smiled at her, now twisted in betrayal. Rage at the silence of the elders, the cowardice of the one who had loved her, the cruelty of neighbors who had taken her songs and turned them into weapons against her. Her vision swam with blackness, her body trembling on the edge of stillness. Yet her thoughts did not fade into surrender. They sharpened into a single vow, etched into her soul as the soil claimed her. If the soil is my prison, then let it be my weapon. Darkness held her first, absolute and endless, as though the world had folded itself shut. Her chest no longer rose, her lungs no longer fought, but still she felt. The soil pressed against her, crushing, suffocating, yet in the silence of death she became aware of something she had never sensed before. The earth was not dead weight. It was alive. It shifted, almost imperceptibly, pulsing like a hidden heart. At first it was faint, a vibration brushing against her bones. Then stronger, until the very dirt wrapped around her seemed to hum with breath. The roots that tangled in her hair began to burrow deeper, piercing her scalp like needles, but instead of pain there was a rush of warmth, a strange intimacy. They wound through her flesh, threading into her veins until her blood slowed and her body stiffened. Where she had once carried rivers of red, she now carried sap, dark and heavy, seeping into the earth. Her skin split in places, crumbling as if it too had turned to loam. Worms crawled through the seams, weaving her body into the underworld. Her fingernails softened into brittle shards, then reformed as claws of root and stone. Her eyes, sealed shut by dirt, no longer needed to see. She perceived the world in waves of vibration, as if every movement above whispered into her skull. Her body rotted in the grave, but her spirit did not dissolve. It seeped downward and outward, fusing with the soil. She stretched in all directions, and with that stretching came knowledge. She could hear. Not with ears, but through the quiver of roots and the trembling of stones. Above her the village stirred. She heard sandals pressing into the dust, every hurried step, every dragging shuffle. She heard the rhythm of hoes striking barren earth. She heard children wailing from hunger, mothers murmuring lullabies that were more prayer than song. And beneath their voices she heard the others, the liars, the whisperers, the ones who had demanded her grave. Their laughter still echoed, brittle and false. Their prayers rose like smoke, begging the sky for rain, though it was their own hands that had condemned her. The voices struck her like knives. She felt them not just as sound but as vibrations across her new veins. Each lie was a ripple, each curse a tremor. And she realized with something like awe that she was no longer bound by rope or flesh. She was boundless. Roots pierced deeper into her, claiming what was left of her body. They slid into her ribs, wrapped around her spine, coiled through the hollow of her skull. And she welcomed them. For every inch of herself that decayed, another piece awakened. She was becoming less human but more than human. She felt her hands, though she had no hands now, spread through the soil like branches. She reached into the cracks of dry ground, into the narrow tunnels of worms, into the moisture hidden deep beneath rock. She felt the heartbeat of seeds lying dormant, waiting for rain that would never come. They whispered to her in silence, calling her kin. For a moment, grief returned, sharp and unbearable. She thought of her brother's face, tear-streaked as they pulled her away. She thought of her mother's cough, her weak arms reaching for her child who never came back. She thought of the man who had loved her in silence, who had looked away when she needed him most. That grief could have drowned her. But the earth took it, cradled it, and reshaped it into something harder. Rage. A rage not of fire but of stone grinding against stone. And then she knew she was not buried. She had not been silenced. She had been planted. Her body was the seed. Her fury the water. The soil the womb. Every whisper above vibrated through her, every lie rattling in her veins like a curse. She felt the councilman muttering about her, spitting her name like venom. She felt the betrayer sleeping soundly in his hut, dreaming of his new power while guilt gnawed faintly at his heart. She felt the children tossing in hunger, whispering to their mothers, "Why did she not save us this year?" And in that moment she was everywhere. Beneath their beds, beneath their crops, beneath the very square where they had cursed her. She lay coiled like a serpent under the village, unseen yet listening, always listening. The soil whispered back to her, 1,000 voices in one. Roots tangled their secrets into her blood. Stones hummed with patience older than the sky. Worms crawled messages across her skin. She was not alone. The underground was vast, infinite, eternal. And now it was hers. Her fury deepened, but so did her clarity. She did not rush. The earth did not rush. Seasons moved through it like single breaths. Time was not her enemy. Her body might wither, but her spirit had no end. She was no longer the girl who sang to crops, who coaxed green from the barren. That girl had been fragile, breakable, mortal. Now she was something else entirely. When she shifted her will, she felt the roots respond, tightening, flexing. When she thought of water, she felt it stir in the deep places, hidden far below. When she remembered the taste of rage, the worms writhed, restless, as though eager to deliver her hunger to the world above. She smiled in the dark, not with lips but with the grinding of stones around her skull. She had been their scapegoat, their sacrifice. Now she was their reckoning. She was no longer beneath the earth, she was the earth. The first sign was the field. It happened overnight. Where the earth had been cracked and barren, stalks pushed through by dawn. The villagers rushed to see, their voices lifting in wonder. Corn, tall and golden, swayed where only dust had been. But when they plucked an ear and split it open, horror silenced their joy. The kernels glistened, slick and red, dripping down their hands. Blood seeped between their fingers, warm and metallic, staining the ground. The villagers dropped the ears, stumbling back, their cries rising like birds startled from trees. The corn kept dripping, pooling at their feet until the soil drank it in. Children were the next to notice. Playing in the dirt near their huts, they froze when they heard voices beneath their fingertips. Whispers, faint but insistent, curling through the soil like smoke. At first the children laughed, thinking it a game, pressing their ears to the ground. But the whispers grew sharper, filling their heads with names, names of the villagers who had thrown the first stone, who had lifted the first shovel of dirt. The children ran screaming to their mothers, but when they tried to repeat what they had heard, no words would come. Only soil spilled from their mouths, a grainy trickle of earth that made the elders cross themselves in terror. At night the village could not sleep. The ground itself seemed restless, shifting and swelling with every breath of the wind. Huts trembled as if something massive stirred beneath them. The people lay awake, clutching each other, listening to the groan of the earth. Some swore they felt it rising and falling, inhaling, exhaling as though the soil had grown lungs. One woman claimed she heard singing, faint and low, like a lullaby twisted into a dirge. She covered her ears, but the song crawled through her bones, making her weep without knowing why. The elders gathered in the square, their faces pale. They called it a curse. They said the girl's spirit had not rested, that the earth rejected her burial. They urged prayer, fasting, sacrifice. But their voices shook, and even as they preached faith, their eyes darted to the ground as though afraid it would open beneath them. And open it did. It began with one man, the very one who had tied the ropes around her wrists before the burial. He walked across the square, his sandals slapping the dust. People watched him, their whispers sharp. Then without warning his foot sank. Only an inch at first, then more. He yanked, but the soil clung to him, pulling like tar. His cry shattered the morning air as he sank to his knees, his hands clawing at the ground. Villagers rushed to him, grasping his arms, but the earth was hungrier than they were strong. The soil swallowed him up to his chest, then his neck while his eyes bulged with terror. He screamed her name, but his voice cut short as the ground closed over his mouth. His last sound was a muffled gasp before the soil sealed, smooth and silent, as if he had never existed. Panic erupted. Women shrieked. Men staggered back, crossing themselves, spitting to ward off evil. The children clung to their mothers, eyes wide with fear. No one approached the square again. But it did not stop. The crops that had sprouted bled into the water jars, turning every sip bitter with iron. Goats born in the night carried no cries, only silence, their eyes wide and unblinking as if they already saw death. Dogs howled at nothing, their voices breaking the stillness until villagers beat them into quiet. And always the ground breathed. Some villagers whispered that it was justice, though they dared not say it aloud. They remembered her kindness, her songs, the way she had coaxed green from dry land. They remembered her laughter and the way her hands had brushed theirs in the fields. A few wept in secret, ashamed of what they had done. But shame did not stop the earth. It only tightened its grip. The council tried to calm the village, but their own fear betrayed them. They ordered the people to burn incense, to chant prayers, to sacrifice chickens and goats. Blood poured over the soil, but the ground did not drink it. The sacrifices rotted where they fell, filling the air with stench. By the second week, no one slept. The villagers lived in constant dread, glancing at the ground with every step, afraid their feet would sink. Some packed what little they had and fled, but the soil followed them. Those who left found their paths blocked by fallen trees or sudden floods, as if the earth itself rose to keep them contained. Children cried that the whispers grew louder at night. They spoke of hands brushing against theirs in the dirt, of a face forming in the soil when they looked too long. Some drew pictures in the dust, eyes wide and weeping, a mouth open in rage. Parents scolded them, but the drawings reappeared each morning, etched fresh as though the ground itself were speaking. And always she listened. From beneath the village, her spirit pulsed through every root, every grain of soil. She felt their terror, their prayers, their frantic beating hearts. She had once loved them, but that love had died with her last breath. What remained was not forgiveness. It was the patient hunger of the earth itself. The man who had tied her wrists was gone, devoured. Others would follow. Not quickly, not mercifully. She would let them taste the dread of waiting, the dread of hearing whispers in the dirt and not knowing if it was their turn. Each breath of the soil reminded them, she was not gone. She was here, beneath their feet, always listening, always waiting. And then one night, when the moon hung red above the trees, the ground quivered louder than before. Children woke screaming. The square split with a sound like thunder, dust billowing into the air. The villagers gathered, trembling as the soil heaved. Something was rising. It was not her body. That had already fed the roots, melted into the veins of the earth. What rose was something else, an echo of her form, sculpted from mud and bone, eyes hollow yet burning with light no fire could match. She stood at the center of the square, tall and silent, her head bowed as if listening to the heart of the world. The villagers fell to their knees, unable to look away. She did not speak, not yet. The earth spoke for her, rumbling beneath their bodies, whispering through the roots that coiled under their homes. Her silence was heavier than any scream. The villagers wept. The council trembled. The children, too young to lie, whispered the truth in voices like prayer. She has come back. And the earth, pulsing beneath them, agreed. She was justice. She was curse. She was theirs. The soil had not buried her. It had armed her. And now it was hungry. Hook. A man sinks into the ground while walking, screaming as the soil eats him. The reckoning did not come all at once. It came slowly, deliberately, like a hand tightening a noose. The first to vanish had been the rope binder, the man who tied her wrists. His screams still haunted the square, a warning etched into the villagers' ears. But the soil was not satisfied with one. It remembered every hand that had lifted a shovel, every voice that had chanted for her death, every finger that had pointed in accusation. And so, one by one, the guilty were taken. The councilman who first declared her a witch was the next. He was walking to the well at dawn when the ground cracked open beneath him. His jug shattered as he fell, the shards slicing his hands as he clawed at the air. The villagers heard his shrieks, but by the time they arrived, only silence remained. The well stood untouched, the ground smooth again as though he had never existed. Only the spilled water remained, soaking into the dust like a libation offered to her. Another was a woman who had thrown stones at her during the trial, her voice the loudest in the chant for burial. She was grinding millet outside her hut when the soil beneath her pestle split wide. She tried to run, but the earth clung to her legs like tar, pulling her down as she wailed. Her children watched, screaming as their mother's body sank grain by grain until only her desperate fingers clawed the air. Then even those were gone, leaving behind a circle of churned soil that trembled long after she disappeared. The village grew restless with dread. No one trusted the ground. Men tied ropes around their waists, anchoring themselves to posts when they walked across the square. Women carried charms of bone and feather, muttering prayers to ward off the curse. Yet still the earth took whom it wanted and none could resist. But not all were taken. Those who had once shown her kindness found themselves spared. The old woman who used to bring her water in the fields walked unharmed through the square while others clung to the walls in fear. The boy she had taught to plant seeds could run barefoot across the soil without it stirring beneath him. Even her mother, though frail and coughing in her hut, felt the ground still and gentle beneath her mat, as if the earth itself cradled her in secret mercy. The villagers began to notice. They whispered to each other, realizing there was a pattern, a choice being made. This was not a curse blind in its hunger. It was justice with eyes sharp as a blade. And then came the one who had loved her in silence. He had not raised a stone against her. He had not lifted a shovel. But he had looked away. He had let his silence bury her just as surely as the soil had. And that silence weighed heavier on him than any rope. He came to the place where they had buried her, his knees weak, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The grave was gone now, the soil too alive to hold the shape of pits. But he knew where she lay, or rather where she had once lain before the earth claimed her. He fell to the ground, pressing his forehead into the dirt, tears soaking the soil that had become her skin. "I should have spoken," he whispered, voice breaking. "I should have fought for you. Forgive me." He clawed at the dirt with bare hands as though to reach her, though he knew it was useless. His sobs shook his chest, raw and desperate, filling the night with a grief that had come too late. "I loved you," he confessed, choking on the words. "I loved you and I was a coward. If you will take me now. If you will spare me, I will carry your memory until I die. But please, do not hate me." For a moment, silence stretched. Only the crickets sang, their chorus thin and trembling. The man pressed his face harder into the soil, weeping. Then the ground began to tremble. It started as a low murmur, a vibration humming through his ribs. Then it grew louder, stronger, until the earth itself seemed to grow restless under his weight. The trees swayed though no wind blew. The huts rattled as though struck by unseen hands. Villagers rushed into the night, their eyes wide, watching as the soil quaked beneath the man's body. He clutched the ground, holding on, certain it would swallow him. His heart pounded in terror, yet beneath it was hope, hope that she heard him. The shaking rose into a roar, splitting the night open. The earth heaved like a wounded beast, cracks spidering across the square, stones tumbling from the fire pits. The villagers screamed, scattering into the shadows, while the man remained prostrate on the trembling soil. It did not swallow him. It did not spare him either. The quake was not punishment, not mercy. It was an answer. The ground shuddered violently as if her spirit had stirred from the deep, listening to his confession. The soil itself seemed to pulse beneath him, alive, aware. It did not take him into its depths, but it did not let him rise either. He remained pinned, pressed flat by the trembling earth as if she were deciding. The villagers whispered later of that night. Of how the man wept into the dirt as the earth roared back at him. Of how the ground did not open but neither did it still. Of how the tremors seemed to speak, a language older than words. To some it was judgment. To others it was the first sign of forgiveness. But to the man who had confessed, it was a weight he would carry forever, that the soil had listened. The buried girl was no longer a victim. She was justice and justice had heard him. And the earth shook violently as if answering him. The village no longer looked like the place it had once been. Where children used to play, sinkholes gaped like open mouths, silent and waiting. Paths that had led to the well now ended in sudden hollows, their edges crumbling beneath trembling feet. The fields, once dry and cracked, were now bursting with green, lush, thick, impossibly fertile. Corn rose high, beans twisted up poles, yams swelled fat beneath the soil. At first the people thought it was a blessing, a sign the earth had relented. But when they tried to eat, their hope turned to dread. The corn oozed rot when split. The beans tasted of ash, leaving tongues blackened. The yams bled a dark, bitter sap that burned the throat. No matter how the villagers boiled, roasted, or dried the harvest, it poisoned them. Some choked and retched, others fell fevered and trembling, eyes rolling back. Even the animals would not touch the food. Goats starved beside heaps of plenty, their ribs sharp beneath their skin. The villagers wept at the sight. A feast of famine lay before them, abundance that could never nourish, a mockery of the bounty she had once coaxed from the ground. Her songs had once made the earth generous, now her silence made it cruel. Huts collapsed as the ground shifted beneath them. Graves split open, the bones inside gone, leaving only hollow earth. The villagers whispered that the dead themselves had been claimed by her, taken into her body of soil and root. They said she walked beneath them, restless, her footsteps hollowing the ground, her breath rotting the fields. At night, no one slept. The soil breathed louder now, a deep groan that rose from the pit of the world. Sometimes, voices murmured beneath the huts, whispers of names, of sins, of confessions unspoken. The villagers lay awake, terrified, knowing that justice had not finished with them. "She walks beneath us," they said. The words spread like fire, passed from lip to lip, always in a whisper as though speaking too loud would summon her. Children repeated it in their sleep. Elders muttered it into their hands. Even the council, broken and thinned, said it beneath their breath. The village was a wasteland dressed in abundance, a graveyard wearing a mask of life. And at its center, the soil pulsed like a heart that would never stop. Yet in the midst of despair, one boy stood apart. Her brother, small and fragile, with eyes still raw from crying, crept into the cursed field at dawn. His bare feet sank into the damp soil, but he did not flinch. In his hands he held a single seed, tiny, unremarkable, a remnant from the last harvest before her death. It was all he had left of her, and all he had left of hope. The villagers had warned him not to go, whispering that the earth would swallow him too. But the boy did not care. He knelt in the cursed soil, pressing the seed gently into the ground with trembling fingers. His lips moved in silence, not in prayer to the sky, but to her. To the sister who had sung life into barren fields. To the girl they had buried. For a long moment nothing happened. Only silence, only the hush of soil shifting faintly beneath him. Then the ground stirred. Not violently, not with the hunger that had devoured others, but softly, like a breath taken in. The soil shifted around the seed, cradling it. The boy held his breath, eyes wide. A shoot broke the surface. Green, tender, alive. It rose swiftly, impossibly, curling upward into the light. Leaves unfurled, glistening with dew that had not fallen from the sky. In moments, the plant stood tall, vibrant, bearing a single flower pale as bone yet glowing faintly in the dawn. The boy touched its petals, tears spilling down his cheeks. It did not rot, did not bleed, did not poison. It was pure. A gift, perhaps, or a sign. Behind him, villagers watched in silence, their fear tangled with wonder. For the first time since her burial, the earth had given something untainted. And it had been for him, her brother, the one she had loved without condition. The villagers whispered again, but this time their words trembled differently. "She walks beneath us." But now some wondered, did she walk in rage alone? Or did she still remember love? The cursed village held its breath, waiting to see. Hook, her brother plants a seed in the cursed earth, and it blooms. Years later, no map bore the name of the village. The paths that once led to it had faded, swallowed by creeping grass and thickets of thorn. Travelers passed by unknowingly at first, until they noticed the land itself shift beneath their feet. The air grew heavier there, as though the earth was listening. Ruins lay scattered beneath tangled vines, walls crumbling into heaps of stone, huts reduced to mounds of dirt. Trees rose from rooftops. Roots pushed through doorways. It was not abandonment alone that had undone the village, but a hand more deliberate, more patient. The soil had claimed it. Those who dared to stop spoke of strange sounds carried on the wind. Laughter, soft and broken, rising and falling like children at play. Yet no children lived there. The laughter came from nowhere and from everywhere, echoing in the branches, running like water through the grass. At night, the sound deepened, becoming a hum that vibrated through bone and marrow. The ground itself seemed to breathe. Travelers told of footsteps that followed them. Light, close, always just behind, though no one was ever there. Some felt the earth shift when they walked, the dirt sinking as though something moved beneath, keeping pace with them. Others swore the soil warmed like flesh when touched, pulsing faintly, as if it had grown its own heartbeat. They did not stay long. Around campfires, far from the ruins, the story spread. A girl, they said, had been buried alive. A girl who sang to the earth, who gave it her voice, her life, her blood. A girl betrayed, silenced by those she had fed. The villagers thought the grave would end her, but instead it opened her. She had become the soil itself, the breath in the roots, the rot in the fields, the hand that pulled down huts and swallowed graves. Now she was no longer just a girl. She was the mother of Earth's wrath, the one who walked beneath, the one who whispered in the roots. Children were warned never to mock the hungry, never to turn away the weeping, never to poison the hands that fed them, for she was listening. Always. Some who feared her left offerings at the edge of the ruins. Bowls of milk, baskets of seed, the first fruit of their harvest. In the morning these offerings were gone, swallowed clean by the earth. Whether she had taken them or the land itself had devoured them, none could say. But those who gave claimed their own fields grew greener, their soil richer. Others, reckless or unbelieving, took from the ruins stones, relics, bones half buried in the dirt. They did not return. Their bodies were never found, but stories said the ground remembered them. Travelers passing later would hear new voices added to the laughter, harsher, broken, like screams muffled in the earth. Generations passed, but the legend endured. The village remained a scar upon the land, overgrown yet never forgotten. And those who told the story always ended it the same way, with a warning, a truth too heavy to escape. They gave her to the soil. And here the firelight always dimmed, and listeners leaned in, feeling the earth beneath them grow heavier. And the soil never gave her back.